Looks like we've landed in France, so get ready. We'll be talking about the French Renaissance. So buckle your seats and enjoy. Notice the date in which the early Renaissance starts in France. The Renaissance in France started about 85 years after it had started in Italy. This early Renaissance period in France is basically a transitional period. It's a mixture of Gothic structural forms mixed with Italian Renaissance architectural detail and ornament. The reign of Francis I is credited with the true beginning of the Renaissance arts in France. Francis had been unsuccessful in his military ventures, and in 1525 had been defeated by Charles V in Italy and held prisoner. There in Italy, he had the opportunity to observe the Cinquecento, and after his release, his greatest ambition was to make his reign notable for the glories of art rather than for military or political success. Francis's dominant interests lay primarily in the province of Turin, some 150 miles southwest of Paris. He developed the social life of the nobility in the region and built a lot of chateaus along the Loire River. Chateau de Schomberg was Francis I's pride and joy. It was built as a hunting lodge, or we would say a second home, and was located about 30 miles outside of Paris. As you can see by the image in this slide, during this time period, French design remained engrossed in the heaviness of the medieval styles, and it stayed this way well into the 16th century. This is when Leonardo da Vinci left Italy and went to France to become a military advisor to King Francis I. Leonardo brought with him the spirit of the Renaissance. Chateau de Schomberg, the king's palatial hunting lodge, introduced classical design mixed with medieval fortification. It was not until Francis's successor, Henry II, who married Catherine de' Medici of Italy, that French chateaus were transformed into Italian-inspired palaces. Italian culture was virtually brought to France through Catherine's importation of Italian craftsmen and artists who transformed the French chateau from a ponderous medieval castle into a refined Renaissance estate. Chateau de Schomberg and Fontainebleau quickly became showplaces of French Renaissance styling, executed by Italian wood carvers painters, and plasterers. The fun thing about Schönberg is that it has the emblem of Francis I everywhere. Now, the emblem for Francis I was the salamander motif. So take a look and enjoy this wonderful detail. In the initial stages of the French Renaissance, some patrons and architects favored the medieval chateau type, but with greater regularity of plan, as seen with Chateau Schönberg. Once again, the chateau was built between 1526 and 1544. Medieval features of Schönberg include a moat, a walled enclosure, and circular towers for the keep. In regards to the keep, there were 8 self-contained apartments on each floor, 4 in the corners and 4 in the towers. The famous dual stairway centers the hall of a Greek cross plan. This remarkable staircase, whom many think was designed by Leonardo da Vinci, had twin spiral flights. This allowed those ascending and those descending to be unaware of each other. Well, look at this. This is the double staircase at Schönberg, which many attribute to the genius of Leonardo da Vinci. With this staircase, you have 2 parallel stairways wrapped around one another, where 2 people can walk up and down without ever meeting. This stone coffered ceiling is one of my favorites. I love how the salamander motif alternates with the letter F, both symbols for Francis I. The following slides will showcase French furniture at the time of Francis I. During the early French Renaissance, furniture was designed on a smaller scale and was more lightweight than the heavier Gothic style. Most chairs were small enough to be arranged in the room according to need and function. The most typical placement was still against the wall. Ornamentation emphasized carved techniques, relying on subdued classical details, as many Gothic patterns were still fashionable. This is the most recognizable chair produced during the early French Renaissance. The chair is known as the cockatois chair. It was used to promote conversation. The chair's broad seat and curved arms allowed the guests to comfortably pivot from left to right as the focus of conversation shifted in the room. This chair is designed with classically based motifs. It was favored by both men and women. The chair was designed with a tall, slender back, reminiscent of Gothic verticality. The seat was much wider in the front since it followed the curves on the arms. The back legs were also much closer together than the front legs, since they were a continuation of the back panel. Legs are joined with a continuous stretcher close to the floor and mounted on bun feet. The need for horizontal display surfaces is directly responsible for the dressoir, a style of cabinet popularized in the Middle Ages and used throughout the Renaissance. The dressoir is a cabinet with a central case at eye level, usually having two doors on either side of a central panel. Below the case is an open area a few inches above the floor to display large items such as platters and vases. Don't you just love these fireplace mantels? So the mantel during the French Renaissance was the most decorative feature in the room. The overmantel was frequently supported by columns or by pilasters. Do notice that the designs are inspired by classical detail, but not always by classical proportions. Look how top-heavy the overmantel is. But no matter the proportion, it's still a piece of work and quite beautiful. The time period following the death of Francis I is known as the Middle French Renaissance. It begins in about 1547 and continues until about 1589. So when Francis I dies, he is followed by his son Henry II. It was Henry II who married the Italian Catherine de' Medici. It is said that Catherine was a cruel but forceful character. She completely controlled Henry and their three sons, each of whom succeeded to the throne. In terms of interiors and furnishings, we can see that there becomes a gradual elimination of Gothic forms, and we see greater use of Italian ornament and Renaissance architectural detail. Under Henry II and his three sons, the decorative Gothic elements dwindled. Rooms were treated in much the same manner as the preceding period. There occurred, however, a better understanding of the true classical proportions in the use of orders. In many rooms, the walls continued to be covered with wood paneling of small Gothic proportions, but the field of the panels was often painted or carved with arabesque forms. Ceilings were still beamed, but the coffered panel was introduced. Henry adopted the crescent as his symbol and the monograms of the letters H and D. The D was for his mistress, Diane de Poitiers. Both monograms were frequently carved in the woodwork of this period. Toward the middle of the century, the chair began to grow lighter in form, and the characteristic upright rectangular chair with open arms was introduced. Essentially, it was severe and simple in form and sparingly decorated. Especially typical were the down-turning arms terminating in ram's heads. In addition, the arms make use of the baluster form. This large case piece, known as an armoire, was designed to store articles of clothing. As the proper name suggests, this furniture piece was actually an armoire of two pieces. Having a separate top and bottom made it much easier for the cabinet maker to transport. When looking at the armoire, the front and sides of the upper body are recessed, and the lower body, which is generally more oblong in appearance, is mounted on bun feet. Other noticeable features include the upper body being surmounted by a pediment and the use of columns. This interior depicts a life of wealth and leisure. A monumental bed is seen on a dais. Above the bed is a teaster. The teaster is hung with luxurious fabrics. In terms of colors, we see rich and highly saturated hues, hues of gold, deep blue, olive, brown, cream, and rust. In terms of flooring, we see terracotta tile. We see painted walls and a beam ceiling which has been embellished with repeating motifs. One of the most important leaders of the French Renaissance was Henry IV. Henry IV was the successor of Henry II. Henry IV was originally a Protestant who turned Catholic to gain the crown of France. Henry IV married Marie de Medici of Florence. Henry was a friend of the people and thought that groups of conflicting beliefs could live in amity. He was active in the final settlement of the religious difficulties of the people and by the Edict of Nantes. The Edict of Nantes was created to create religious tolerance. This brought peace to the country. The Edict of Nantes permitted and encouraged the development of the industrial arts. As a result of the edict, many Protestant artists and craftsmen who had been persecuted under the Spanish control, immigrated to France. Louis IV was succeeded by his son, Louis XIII. Louis was just 9 years old when his father passed. Therefore, his mother, Maria de' Medici, ruled as regent. She, I tell you, was a woman without principles. She lavished the resources of her crown upon nobles and leagued herself in various ways with Spain. When Louis became of age, he eventually banished his mother from the throne. This created all sorts of chaos, as Louis himself was a feeble ruler. There was little peace in France until Cardinal Richelieu, spiritual advisor to the court, became the virtual ruler of France. He ruled from about 1622 to 1642. Richelieu wore alternately two helmets, one as general of the army, the other a cardinal's hat. He was a statesman of extraordinary genius. He was also a patron of art and literature. It was he who established the French Academy. During the Henry IV and Louis XIII periods, the Gothic forms of design were completely eliminated. Royal patronage and protection of the artists became an established policy. Henry IV was responsible for carpet, silk, and glass factories. He established artists and weavers at the studios at the Louvre. Craftsmen from Italy made textiles which were rich in gold and silver threads. The rooms of the palace became more dignified and formal. Wall panels in wood were greatly enlarged and were seen in a diversity of shapes. The moldings used to form the panels were heavy, and the fields of the panels began to be painted and carved with large Baroque patterns borrowed from the Italians, Spanish, and Flemish sources. Floors were in marble squares or parquet wood patterns. Ceilings continued to be beamed or in coffered patterns. I hope you have enjoyed our brief encounter with the French Renaissance. I would like to conclude by reiterating the importance of the printing press. The advent of the printing press in the late 15th century revolutionized the dissemination of knowledge. Printing presses produced books, which led to the rise in literacy and to the spread of Renaissance ideas.